Okay, welcome to an episode of It's Not What You Think. This is Rick.
And this is Darren.
And today we're exploring the years 900 to 950. We are walking our way through the development of Western music. We started way back when, and we've slowly progressed, picking pieces of music through each time period and developing an overarching sense of the evolution of music. And we've realized that this period, around the 900s, is really when classical music is starting to come to what we would consider classical music.
Yeah, that's right.
We listened to some instrumental pieces, Nocturne Balbulus, yes. And then we also listened to some harmony. Last week specifically, we heard the Lament of Charlemagne. We got some, the real beginning of harmony starting to develop. And now today, what I want to listen to is, you know, in the Ambrosian chants, we had the soloist, and then the choir would come in, and that was brought from the Eastern influences. St. Ambrose brought that over to the West. And what we have today is the first call and response, which is an evolution from the soloist followed by the choir. And so the call and response, you have a musical dialogue.
That's right.
And so where you have one person, the piece is called Quem Quaeritas, and that means, whom do you seek? And then the answer is Jesus Christ. And so you have the call and response, the first musical dialogue, which ends up being the very, very beginnings of musical theater, or you can say opera.
Exactly.
So it really starts in the church. The church musical theater and musical drama starts in the church because the monks were the only ones who can read and write. So the average man, how are you going to teach them the Bible? You have to go to Mass, and what Mass is a recreation of the Last Supper. And so they also, we recognize that as being the Mass traditionally, but they would perform lots of different episodes of the Bible in order to teach. And so this particular one is the resurrection of Christ, where you have the women, Mary, actually the three Marys, come to the tomb of Christ, and they are met by an angel, and they ask, well, where is Christ? And he was resurrected. And so they actually would not only sing it as a musical dialogue, but they would perform it as well. They would have props, and they would have costumes, and they would perform this play.
And interestingly, that practice persists to today. I can recall in my youth going to church, having to perform plays in the same sort of sense, where we were reenacting, you know, whether it's the resurrection or any of the other significant, the most common one, of course, is the birth of Christ and the Nativity. That's recreated every single year using figurines. So, and you can see the evolution that takes place there.
I don't think I've ever done that in Sunday school. I remember a lot of reading in, like,
recitation.
Well, no, we had some crazy book that was like, you know, lessons, and
interesting.
Yeah, it was reading a book about a book.
As only Christians do.
I guess. But anyway, I think this is really exciting. This is really interesting. This is definitely a monumental piece of history.
Yes.
And so let's give our attention to Quem Quirites.
Okay.
When Rome fell to the conquering Huns in 476 AD, the formal theatre in Western Europe came to an end. It was reborn 500 years later inside the church. From the marriage of pagan joyousness and Christian asceticism sprang a new drama. The human instinct to play act reasserted itself. The stories of Christmas and Easter were acted out. This happened first in England, in Winchester, where lie the bones of the old Anglo-Saxon kings Canute and Ethelred. In the year 965, the bishop instructed his monks, "Let 4 brothers costume themselves. One shall be in an alb and go secretly to the place of the sepulchre. There let him sit quietly. Let the other 3, dressed in copes and holding thuribles, go forth toward the sepulchre as if they were seeking something. This is done to represent the angels sitting at the tomb and the women coming with spices to anoint the body of Jesus."
Quem quiritis in sepulchro.
Quem quiritis in sepulchro? Whom are you seeking in the sepulchre?
Iesum Nazarenum crucifixum, o celi cola. Non est hic surrexit.
Non est hic. He is not here. He is risen, as was predicted. Go and tell the people that Christ is risen.
Surrexit dicentes. Alleluia, resurrexit Dominus, hodie leo fortis, Christus filius Dei, Deo gratias dicite.
Let the angel call them back, saying, "Come and see the place."
Alleluia, alleluia. Citoium tes dicite discipulis quia surrexit Dominus. Alleluia, alleluia.
Then the angel removes the veil and shows them the place, now bare of the crucifix, but containing the cloths in which it had been wrapped. Let them take up the cloths and show the choir that the Lord is risen.
Surrexit Dominus de sepulchro, qui pro nobis perpendit in ligno. Alleluia.
Then the prior begins the hymn, Te Deum Laudamus. We praise thee, God.
Te Deum laudamus. Te Deum confitemus.
Soon the dramatic instinct took over. Though the subjects remained biblical, the productions became so secular that the church eventually evicted them. Henceforth, they were performed in churchyard or town center. A whole cycle of little actings out of all the stories from Genesis to the Day of Judgment.
Okay, that was Quem Quirites. And impressions?
I think it's interesting to see the evolution of the chant it does have all of the elements of a standard liturgical chant,
Yeah.
where the question is being asked by the soloist and responded to by, in this case there's only 3, but a choir
Yeah.
of singers, of vocalists, and it has a lot of the hallmarks of the chant.
And it makes complete sense that that's where you take the music.
Right.
You know, I mean, when you're singing, a soloist and then a choir sings, and then a soloist and a choir sings.
Yes.
I mean, what comes to mind is naturally you're thinking, oh, well, why don't we put some conversational dialogue in its place, and then we can have, you know, the soloist singing, and then the others respond. The choir responds.
And the interesting thing about the fact that they would have played this out is that the common person does not understand Latin.
Mhm.
Maybe a few of them might understand a few words here and there, but not to the extent that they're going to understand everything that's been asked in this, aside from somebody telling them what it means. And so the idea of playing it out, I can imagine an audience in medieval Western Europe watching this take place, going, "Oh, that's what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Oh, they're talking about Jesus, and this is, it's obviously this would be done around Easter." So, but they would see it, and then they can envision what sort of the priest is talking about, and whatever is.
Well, not only is there a cognitive understanding, but there's like a spiritual understanding as well. Like, you know how, like, when you're watching a movie and you get into it, you start experiencing what the main character experiences. You start crying when they are in an emotional moment, and you feel victorious when they are winning the sports game or something.
Right.
And so when you're at church and you're watching these and there's music like a soundtrack, then you're going to get swept up and you're going to be pulled into it, and you're going to experience the spiritual reactions of the participants of the characters.
Right.
So it was probably very, very intense and impactful for the people watching.
Yeah, and I mean, you got to imagine as well that many, and if not most, of medieval population were illiterate. They couldn't read, they couldn't write,
Right.
and so how do you convey the message of the Bible in a way that can be easily comprehended by the layperson?
And what's
it out.
what's pretty brilliant is that there aren't any musical instruments. It's all vocals, so it can be done anywhere.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the times they would take these little vignettes and bring them out into the square and perform them for everyone in the town square even.
Yeah, and what I expect we're going to see following this, and less around the music and more around the culture, is a return to theatrical presentation.
Right.
I've said in previous episodes that I feel like in Western Europe there is a sort of a neoclassical period where the monarchs and the church even are hearkening back to ancient Greek culture, plays, the way that they're using instruments now with the music instead of just chanting. They're sort of rediscovering classical culture from the ancient times and abstracting it into the medieval times. And I expect that following the introduction of the Quem Queritus and other sort of theatrical renditions of biblical stories, that we're going to see a rise of other more non-religious theatrical representations, and leading up to what ultimately becomes, the Shakespearean and the Renaissance.
Right. Well, interestingly enough, this particular piece launched a kind of revival around the 1300s, and we can listen to that.
Okay.
Quis
Okay, so we just listened to Visitatio Sepulchre, which was written around the 1300s, and the style is a little bit different. Now we're getting some instrumentation,
Right.
and the lyrics are still the same. I could hear them pulling out. And by the way, that the Quem Quiritas, that scene comes from John, the book of John in the New Testament.
Okay.
And so they're recreating scenes from the Bible. Impressions of this particular version?
So you can hear the evolution of the liturgical music from the more Gregorian chant style that we've become accustomed to. Now there's sort of I don't know, a little bit more free flowing. It doesn't feel so rigid.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
It has the same air of legitimacy and
holiness.
Yeah, that was the word I was looking for. And but it lacks the sort of rigidity of the Gregorian style.
Yeah,
it's not confined by any rules.
When I listen to Gregorian chant, it tends to be impersonal. When I listened to this particular version, I felt it to be a little more personal.
Yeah, and that may be intentional. Again, I mean, I think if part of the practical application of putting on these theatrical performances is to bring the public's awareness up in terms of the stories of the Bible,
right? Making
it relatable is definitely one way to do that.
Yes, precisely. Well, speaking of making it relatable, there's another gentleman, James McMillan, who in 1992, 1993 wrote his version of Visitatio Sepulchre, and I think we're going to get a big difference here.
Okay. So
that was a little portion of the second movement, James McMillan's Visitatio Sepulchri, and very different.
Very different.
He's adding percussion, which adds a real interesting flavor to the whole like ambiance and gestalt of the piece.
Yeah, but for me, I think percussion gives it direction. It makes it feel like there's a plot driver. Whereas, you know, if you were just, and I mean, I don't want to take away, I don't want to distract from the chanting there, because really impressive singing on the bass end.
Yeah.
I was really hearing some low end, and the amount of people that can hit those low notes are limited.
Yeah.
But as he's going, when the percussion comes in, it almost feels like it's like a stage change. They're changing the scene. It's a plot. It feels like a plot driver.
Oh, okay, okay.
And so rather than, because this is obviously a musical piece as opposed to a theatrical performance, he has to convey movement some way. And I think the sort of chaotic percussion that he adds does that.
Oh, okay, okay. I hear what you're saying. And ironically, he did have performances of it, full stage performances of it. And so it would be interesting to know what that was like.
Yeah.
But it's certainly, like you said, it could be during the scene changes.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, so the percussion there, that sort of chaotic percussion, I almost imagine stage hands running across the stage in black, trying to move things around to get set up for the next scene, and then after the percussion resolves, it comes back to that quiet hum of the chant, and then moves in, and then the introduction of the other instruments as well. Again, it feels like a scene change. It's like we come in with a chant, it's just a chant, percussion happens, scene change, back to the chant, but now we've got some other instruments on top.
Right, right. We've really come a long way. We've brought this with us for over a century. I mean, it started in 946, I think we learned.
Yeah.
And was just bare bones singing. And then it progressed to the 1300s, where you got some bells accompanying, and then a harp, I think, or one of those little handheld lyres. It sounded like.
Yeah.
All the way to the 1990s, 20th century, and percussion.
Yeah.
And a full choir.
Yeah, I mean, it shows the staying power of medieval cultural, influence.
Yeah.
On even the modern Western world.
We've come across several of those. And
indeed,
yeah, you may want to go back and check out a couple of the previous episodes, and you'll hear how the medieval chanting and the Gregorian specifically chants were passed along and survived to Mozart's time and all the way up into even now.
It makes me wonder if McMillan chose this piece specifically because the likes of Mozart, Bach, Beethoven haven't actually covered this piece before.
Right.
And it's almost an original exploration in terms of
well, it hasn't been done yet.
Yeah, reviving the liturgical pieces as opposed to some of the others in past episodes that we've explored. This is not one that I'm familiar with certainly from the more classical composers.
It's almost like, as a painter, you there's like a rite of passage. You do a self-portrait, and it's almost like as a composer, the rite of passage is to do a Gregorian chant or something like that,
Yeah, and I forget the piece actually that we explored, generational.
Te Deum.
The Te Deum. Yeah, it's almost like the Te Deum is the rite of passage for classical composers.
Right. Well, I know a mass certainly has some of that element because, I think every composer has a mass under their belt.
Yeah. At least in the classical composers.
Right.
Modern composers probably not so much. Although you could argue that they do probably have some sort of secular mass, a representation of some ordered phenomenon or something, and it's not quite the same as a liturgical mass, but they're trying to convey that sort of process and procedure.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you enjoyed today's show, and like we're encouraging you, go check out some of the previous ones. And this is one of 3 shows we're doing concurrently.
Yes.
We're walking through the development of Western music in this show, and then we're also following a book of recommendations of music that's inspired by the Bible. We call that show The Bible and Music. And then we also are plugging along What to Listen For in Music by Aaron Copeland, and he's giving us some teaching skills. And so whatever your interest is, we have a show for you.
And make sure you subscribe if you want to get those notifications about any of those shows, and certainly make sure that you're staying tuned with us as we continue to walk through the development of Western music.
All right, until next time.
Stay tuned.